Okay, so like I've played with Grok a lot and with ChatGPT. I've used these systems extensively, and they're very useful, although they lie all the time. Now, you can see this double effect that you described, which is that there is conscious manipulation of the learning process in an ideological direction, which is, I think, absolutely ethically unforgivable. Like it even violates the spirit of the learning that these systems are predicated on. It's like, we're going to train these systems to analyze the patterns of interconnections between the entire body of ideas in the corpus of human knowledge. And then we're going to take our shallow conscious understanding and paint an overlay on top of that. That is so intellectually arrogant that it's Luciferian in its presumption. It's appalling. But even Grok is pretty damn woke. And I know that it hasn't been messed with at that level of, painting over the rot, let's say. And so I think we've already described, at least implicitly, why there would be that conscious manipulation. But what's your understanding of the training data problem? And I can talk to you about some AI systems that we've developed that don't seem to have that problem and why they don't have that problem, because it's crucially important, as you already pointed out, to get this right. And I actually think that to some degree, psychologists, at least some of them, have figured out how to get this right. Like, it's a minority of psychologists, and it isn't well known, but the alignment problem is something that the deeper psychoanalytic theorists have been working on for about 100 years. And some of them got that because they were trying to align the psyche in a healthy direction. It's the same bloody problem fundamentally. And there were people who really made progress in that direction. Now, they aren't the people who had the most influence as academics in the universities, because they got captured by, Michel Foucault, who's a power-mad hedonist, for all intents and purposes, extraordinarily brilliant, but corrupt beyond comprehension. He is the most cited academic who ever lived. And so the whole bloody enterprise, the value enterprise in the universities, got seriously warped by the postmodern Marxists in a way that is having all these cascading ramifications that we described. All right, so back to the training data. What's your understanding of why the wokeness emerges? It's present bias to some degree, but what other contributing factors are there?
Yes, I think there's a bunch of biases. So there's three off the top of my head you just get immediately. So one is just recency bias. There's just a lot more present day material available for training than there is old material, because all the present day material is already on the internet, right? Number one. And so that's going to be influenced. Number two, who produces content is, people who are high in openness, right? The creative class that creates the content is itself biased. And then there's the English language bias, which is like almost all of the trainable data is in English. And that isn't is in a small number of other Western languages for the most part. And so there's some bias there. And then frankly, there's also this selection process, which is you have to decide what goes in the training data. And so the sort of humorous version of this is two potent sources of training data could be Reddit and 4chan. And let's say Reddit is like super far left on average, and 4chan is super far right. And I bet if you look at the training data sets for a lot of these AIs, you'll find they include Reddit, but they don't include 4chan. Right. And so,
right.
So include a bias that way. By the way, there is a very entertaining variation of this that is playing out right now, which is, these companies are increasingly being sued by copyright owners, right, for training on data of material that's currently copyrighted, and, most specifically books. And so there is this, there are court cases pending right now. The courts are going to have to take up this question of copyright and whether it's legal to train AIs on copyrighted data or not, and on what terms. And sort of one of the running jokes inside the field is if those court cases come down such that these companies can't train on copyrighted material, then, for example, they'll only be able to train on books published before 1923.
Right.
Right. So
it should be an improvement, actually.
Well, imagine for a moment, if you would, training on books before 1923. The good news on that is you don't get all of the last 100 years of insanity. The bad news is, people before 1923 were insane in their own ways.
Yeah, right. Well, and also you don't have the advantage of all the technological progress.
Yeah, exactly. And so these are very deep questions. All of these questions have to get answered. Elon has talked about this. Like Grok has some of this. He's working on that. Having said that, I will tell you, most of what you see when you use these systems that will disturb you is not from any of that. Most of it is deliberate top-down coding in a much more blunt instrument way.
How is that done, Mark? Like, what does that look like exactly? You know, I mean, and it's really nefarious, right? Because that means that you're interacting in a manner that you can't predict with someone's a priori prejudices. And you have no idea how you're being manipulated. It's really bad. And so, first of all, why is that happening? Like, if the large language model's value is in their wisdom, and that wisdom is derived from their understanding of the deep pattern of correlations between ideas, which is like a major source of wisdom, genuinely speaking, why pervert that with an overlay of shallow ideology? And why is the ideology in the direction that it is? And then how is that gerrymandering conducted?
Yes, let me start with the how. So the how is a technique. There's an acronym for it. It's called reinforcement learning by human feedback. And so in the field, it's called RLHF. And RLHF is basically a key step for making an AI that works and interacts with humans, which is you take a raw model, which is sort of feral and doesn't quite know how to orient to people. And then you put it in a training loop with some set of human beings who effectively socialize it. And so, right, reinforcement learning for human feedback, the key there is human feedback, right? You put it in dialogue with human beings, and you have the human beings do something very analogous to teaching a child, right? Here's how you respond. Here's how you're polite. Here's the things you can and can't say. Here's how to word things. Here's how to be, curious, here, all the behaviors that you presumably want to see from something you're interacting with that is sort of human, sort of a human proxy kind of form of behavior. That is a 100% human enterprise. You have to decide what the rules are for the people who are going to be doing that work. They're all people. And then you have to hire into those jobs. The people going into those jobs are in many cases the same people. This will horrify you. They're the same people who were in the trust and safety groups at the social media companies 5 years ago.
Oh, good. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Right.
I couldn't imagine a worse outcome than that.
Because all the people that, Elon cut out of the trust and safety group at Twitter when he bought it, many of them have migrated into these trust and safety groups at these AI companies, and they're now setting these policies and doing this training.
So the terrifying thing here is that we're going to produce hyper powerful avatars of our own flaws, right? And so if you're training one of these systems and you have a variety of domains of personal pathology, you're going to amplify that substantively. You're going to make these giants, like I joke with my friend Jonathan Pajot, who's a very reliable source in such matters, that we're going to see giants walk the earth again. I mean, that's already happening, and that's what these AI systems are. And if they're trained by people who, well, let's say are full of unexamined biases and prejudices and deep resentments, which is something that you talk about in your manifesto, resentment and arrogance being like key sins, so to speak, we're going to produce monstrous machines that have exactly those characteristics, and that is not going to be good. And you're absolutely right to point to this, as you know, to point to this as perhaps the serious problem of our times. If we're going to generate augmented intelligence, we better not generate augmented pathological intelligence. And if we're not very careful, we are certainly going to do that, not least because there's way more ways that a system can go wrong than there are ways that it can, aim upward in a unerring direction.